just want to thank you all for inviting me back yet again. I definitely want to thank Dr. Reed for helping put the service together, because I really never know what to do for you all. You haven't met my wife yet, and one of these days I hope to bring the whole family. But I always tell her, it's hard to talk to all of you because you're all so wise. There's doctors, there's psychologists. I mean, there's just so much experience in this room. And sometimes I feel like I just learn so much more from you than you can ever learn from me. But I just want to take that time to thank you. I know Dr. Reed always does say I'm a reverend, and I'm okay with that. But I am a humanist, and I'm endorsed as a humanist, and we typically use celebrant. But I'm not really one for titles. And even where I work, I am the chaplain. But I tell the women I work with, I'm just another guy who just happens to be a chaplain. But I've been working over at TCI for over 4 years now, going on 5 years, and it's another place that I was sent to maybe teach the women, but a lot of times those women teach me. The topic today is the illusion of free will. And if you're looking into that title, you will probably make the assumption that I am going to argue that free will is an illusion. That there's no such thing as free will. We may think we are free, but we are not. It was ever since I first took my philosophy class as a sophomore, junior in high school that I had been very interested or consumed by this idea of being free. I maybe was 15 or 16 years old. But it wasn't until that moment in which I started reading all these great philosophers and this concept of free will comes up that I even questioned this idea that the choices I make, whether they're the right choice or the wrong choice, were other than my own. But in philosophy, this idea of free will is not something that philosophers take for granted. In fact, from a philosophical, logical level, there's very limited and often false ways of proving that free will even exists. That's because the idea of the conscious, the idea of maybe even the soul is unprovable. And so in logic, one can never determine that those things exist. But even after being introduced to this concept of free will, I could not let go. I would unsuccessfully argue with my philosophy teachers saying, well, free will has to exist. Because if it didn't, that means that every choice I've made, every wrong choice I made, every murderer, every rapist, every person that has brought authority over a people and enslaved them had no choice to do otherwise. In fact, if I have no free will, then I am just a slave. And growing up within a Christian church, I had this idea that I was not a slave, that I was free to choose sin or not to sin. I was free to choose a belief in God or not to believe in God. See, in theology, Christian theology, not just Christian theology, many theistic religions have an understanding of free will, but they also have an understanding of a being, a God that knows all things. This idea of everything being predetermined. But even in a theological realm, things that are predetermined does not necessarily mean there is a free will or a free not to choose. The idea is that if everything is predetermined, a being outside of all existence, Aristotle would say the unchanged mover, the thing that put everything into existence, may actually have an opportunity or an idea that sees all events. In fact, in Christianity, the idea is that God knows all, knows what you're thinking right now. He knew what you're thinking 5 minutes ago. And because he knows, or she knows, or it knows, or whatever you want to use for a theological standpoint, because she knows or he knows all those moments that have happened to this moment, they can ultimately predict or know what's going to happen next. Everything's been predetermined. Everything has followed a chain of events. It was only later in seminary that I really understood that this is Arminian theology, and there's many different branches of theology that go over this, but free will is definitely an aspect of that. But if you believe in free will, the idea is that you always have a free choice to choose something other than another. I'm here today because I agreed to be here today. Now, in theory, right, I have a choice not to be here today, but our social norms may say that that would not be something I should do, right? I mean, if I didn't show up, and maybe Dr. Reed was a little concerned because I was running late from the prison today, that wouldn't necessarily fit what is expected of me in society. Now, in our reading from Kurt Vonnegut, and I don't normally do this, well, I guess I do this with you guys. How many of you read Kurt Vonnegut before? Because I have a feeling a lot of you have. And Slaughterhouse-Five, obviously, it's a classic. But for those of you who don't know about this, it's really a war book. And it's actually an anti-war book. And Vonnegut was totally against the war. But why this book came to mind is because this book is often debated in literature classes of talking about whether there is fate or free will. And within this particular text, if you read it, you'll see over and over the phrase again, "so it goes." The character, Billy Pilgrim, says, "so it goes," as he tells a story as if nothing could have happened. And the particular story I chose today is one of the few stories that is not totally surrounded within the concept of war. But it brings up a concept that Billy is unstuck in time. So the second thing you need to know about this story is that Billy has an experience. And this experience is with, and I always say their names wrong, Tranfamadorians, some alien race that ultimately shows him that time is not linear. Time isn't just going forward. It's happening all at once. In fact, even when someone dies, you may be sad when that person dies, but there's no reason to be sad that that person dies because they're still living somewhere else in a different period of time. But this is how Billy ultimately is trying to comprehend the things he went through within the war. In fact, the story opens up with him talking to a friend and wanting to know how could really this war be stopped. And the friend pretty much says, well, war will always happen. There's nothing you can do to prevent it. But the Tralfamadorians in this book starts with this conversation, a conversation that does adhere or go into why we have this dialogue of free will and fate. Because for most of us, free will is just a feeling. Do most of you feel free? I feel free. I mean, I don't really feel free right now to be up here, but I mean, I feel free. Right? But interesting enough, in this story, and Vonnegut is a wonderful, philosopher in his own right with his literatures, but from the story, it says, "Welcome aboard, Mr. Pilgrim," over the loudspeaker. "Any questions?" And Billy, our character, licks his lips, thought for a while, inquired at last, "Well, why me?" And the person said, "That is a very earthling question to ask, Mr. Pilgrim. Why you? Why us, for that matter? Why anything? Because this moment simply is. Have you ever seen bugs trapped in amber?" Yes. Billy, in fact, had a paperweight in his office, which was a blob of polished amber with 3 ladybugs embedded in it. "Well, here we are, Mr. Pilgrim, trapped in the amber of this moment. There is no why." They later go on and say, "If I hadn't spent so much time," and this is the Tranfandorian speaking again, "if I have any idea what was meant by free will, I wouldn't have had any idea what was meant of free will. I visited 31 inhabited planets in the universe, and I've studied reports on 100 more. Only in the Earth is there any talk of free will." So this alien race, and obviously this is fiction, but this alien race has no concept of free will because they have an understanding of time, and that time all is happening at once, and all those moments actually feed into a particular moment, the moment here and now. And the story goes on. And just like the reading in which Mr. Billy Pilgrim gets stuck in time, the scene at the pool is no different. See, Billy in that scene thinks that he is free to choose, right? I mean, his father makes a choice for him, right? You're going to swim, is what the father says. But even that choice is not within the father's ability. He could throw Billy into the pool, hoping he would swim. But Billy thinks he also has a choice. He can swim or not swim. Those are the two choices that are given. And Billy decides, you know what, I'm just going to sink to the bottom. But that choice wasn't his either, because what happens if we just sink to the bottom of the pool? We are human beings. We need oxygen. Can we breathe in oxygen through water? No. So since Billy could not breathe in oxygen underwater, he loses oxygen, loses his consciousness. That wasn't an active choice of his. And then he is plucked out of the water by some stranger. We don't even know if it's the father who rescues him. So it may seem that Billy had a choice, but in the end he was just stuck in a moment. A moment that everything that led up to that came with him not swimming, but ultimately being rescued at the YMCA pool. And my kids go to a YMCA pool, and I'm thankful there are lifeguards there for moments like that. So Billy, and even his father, feels he is free. Sam Harris, and Sam Harris is a neuroscientist, a wonderful author, and he has a book called Free Will. And in this book, he says that free will rides on two assumptions. One, that each of us could have behaved differently than we did in the past. And then two, that we are the conscious source of most of our thoughts and actions in the present. It once again is just a feeling. See, free will often emerges from this feeling, and we feel we're free, so we must be free. And really, that's the logic that is often used in what's called libertarianism free will. Not to be confused with political libertarianism. But they say that because we are free, we should not really even just negate the fact that we can't prove it. The fact that we have a feeling of free will should be taken seriously. But libertarians also will adhere to what we often view as cause and effect, the laws of nature, the laws of motion, that everything in motion stays in motion, everything lays at rest stays in rest. And so they come up with this idea of two different, ultimately, substances, that we are a cause agent, that we can change, we can make something happen out of nothing, and then event agents, that there are certain moments that we just have no control, right, over nature. But what is interesting about this logic is if we are a cause agent, where does the idea of even having such a cause come from? Take my breakfast, for an instance. Breakfast seems pretty simple, right? Do you choose to have breakfast in the morning? Do you choose not to have breakfast in the morning? No. I mean, a lot of people say that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. I also will tell my kids that. Do I believe it? I don't really know because I'm not a doctor. But I say it. So breakfast is important, and I have my preferences for breakfast. I love to have poached eggs in the morning. This is not poached egg. Wrong one. So I love to have poached eggs in the morning. What do you need to have a poached egg in the morning? You need a pot, boiling water, and an egg. And this is a true story, and I'm kind of making it up. I mean, I'm trying to redo this. Oh, it has a seal on it, of course. Oh. Out of my control, right there. So I love my poached eggs. But one day, especially, it was around Easter, around the time I came here the last time, I went to go get an egg, and I pulled out an egg, and I cracked it, and what do you think happened? It was hard. It was hard, because my kids had boiled all the eggs to make hard-boiled eggs. There were no more eggs within the fridge that I could have. So I'm left with a hard-boiled egg. I can't make a hard-boiled egg into a poached egg. Some of you may make hard-boiled eggs out of poached eggs because you boil them too long. But a hard-boiled egg can no longer be made into a poached egg. I could have this poached egg, but I hate poached eggs. I don't hate poached eggs because they don't taste well, but I hate poached eggs because I do not like deviled eggs. Is it deviled eggs? Is that how you say it? The one at Easter, they're like... yeah. Hard-boiled. Hard-boiled, I'm sorry, yeah. Thank you. This is why I trust on you to keep me in line. I was saying poached, hard-boiled. I do not like hard-boiled eggs. Deviled eggs have a horrible smell. In fact, every Christmas, every Easter, where they are located, I have to avoid all the food because I can't stand that smell. So what do I choose now? Do I choose to have this egg or not? Well, no, because I don't want to associate that with a smell. That smell is associated with another event, so I'm not going to eat this egg. So what do I do next? I'm going to have cereal. Cereal is an okay meal. I like toasted Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Wonderful, wonderful cereal. And I go to the fridge to get milk. But I go and I find that all there is just a teeny little bit of milk left. Do I have a choice now to have my cereal with milk still? I do, but I don't like cereal without milk. And I could maybe try something else. I could try to have cereal with water, but I did that once while in my youth, and remembering that it didn't really go too well. So I don't want cereal without milk, so I'm not going to have cereal. So what do I have? Well, this is what I do. I go to Quick Trip. Now, I could maybe choose not to go to Quick Trip, but now biology is kicking in, right? And I'm hungry. And I get hangry. And you can't be hangry at work, because if you're hangry at work, especially when you're dealing with the population I do, it just never goes well. So I need some sort of nourishment. But this is not really good nourishment, right? This is a horrible choice on my part to have. But I go to Quick Trip, and normally this is what happens. I'll go and get a box, and I'm like, I'm not going to eat all this box. But I was brought up with this idea of sharing. So then what happens is, well, if I'm going to buy one box, and this is, I hope my wife doesn't watch what I'm saying here. I'm going to say, well, these are $1.99, but I want my wife to think that I actually bought gas and didn't go to Quick Trip. So I better buy a whole bunch of boxes and then share with everybody at the prison, right? And so the question would be, in a free will state, did I freely choose to be passing out donuts? I don't know if you can eat during the service, but feel free to pass these around. There's more boxes here, yeah. I don't know, maybe we're beer. Was I free to choose? Did I freely make that? Or was my choice a product of all the events, all the experience of my past? And this is where the philosophy of determinism comes from. Baron Dahlbuck was a hardline determinist. And determinism really kind of comes out from this idea, of what Galileo and Newton were ultimately saying about the Earth, right? That this idea we talked a little bit about of cause and effect. This idea of the laws of motion. That there's certain things that we just ultimately cannot have control of. And Dahlbeck ultimately says that the source of man's unhappiness is his ignorance of nature. The idea that because we think we are free, because we think we have this opportunity to choose, that we are ultimately not happy because we're not ever happy with the choices we make. But Dahlbeck will say that, in fact, we never had the choice in the first place. So we need to understand that where we are in this moment is just the moment, and to relish in it. And Dahlbeck, with other philosophers, get into this idea of reductionism, in which that every single moment in your life, and if you want to do an exercise today at some point, think of a significant moment in your life, maybe when you got married, or when you had your first kid, or anything that really stands out, and really think back into how you got to that moment. And I'm going to venture a guess, that you will be able to follow a chain of events that led you to that particular moment. I think back in my own life, I never thought I was going to be a chaplain. In fact, I may have said this before, but I actually said I would never be a chaplain within the prison system. I would rather work with dying people, I told myself, than work with those people. But here I am, a chaplain. Now, in religion, you may say, well, that was ordained by God. And that may be seen. And that's how sometimes we look at views that, God made it happen. And maybe for a time, I maybe had believed that as well. But when I looked at the causes of event, the reason that I end up with working in corrections was really kind of a fluke, but it would be fate, in the sense of this. Before I became chaplain, I was a program support supervisor. Before I was a program supervisor, where I promoted, I was an UA. So I became a chaplain from a different position, So as a UA within the Department of Corrections, I only took that position, which I thought was below me because I had this degree, a bachelor's degree at the time, no master's yet, and this was a receptionist job. And so I thought it was below me, but I took a job because my wife was laid off from her teaching position, which is quite common with teachers. My wife was laid off with a teacher position in the hospital with complications from her first pregnancy when she got her pink slip saying she was laid off. So I needed a job. So I was applying everywhere. I wasn't getting hired by UW-Fond du Lac, UW-Ripon, I mean not UW-Ripon, I'm sorry, UW-La Crosse, Eau Claire. I took interviews everywhere, and the first person to offer me a job was Department of Corrections. So I took it. Now, how I got to that point is a whole nother story, but if I follow the line back, I can determine that I'm a chaplain not because of some random free choice of my own. It was because of all the events that led to it. And all the events that led to it were not just my own. There's other cause agents within that influence. So the fact that you're standing right here in front of me right now changes maybe how I'm talking, or even how I'm working, or even what I'm saying. Looking at your feedback, do you understand, do you not? When I say something completely wrong, right? You're influencing how and exactly what I say. But if you really think that we have free will, and I really don't know where you stand on this, and I would love to hear where you do when I wrap up here shortly, is why do you think you have that free will? Now, you think you have a free will, but what is our thoughts? Sam Harris puts this as a neuroscientist really kind of clearly, is that really all of our thoughts is just a whole bunch of neurons firing. It's all the base load experience. And what are neurons? Well, neurons are biological states. And what are biological states? Well, biological states are physical states. And so if you are going to believe in laws like gravity or laws of motion, you also need to believe that really our free choice, our consciousness, if it is just a biological state, is just that and is succumb to the same laws. But if I really believe, and if you do too, and I don't know where you stand, that we are not free, doesn't that just mean that anybody can just sit there and you can just do what you do and not worry about the world? That doesn't happen because all of our experiences pushes us into action. The fact that you watched that video of the kid today pushes you into action. And maybe you're not kids so much of yourself, but the fact that you maybe have children of your own or grandchildren, you will be influencing them to say that even though you're small, even though you are not maybe powerful or a president or a senator, as he says, you can make a difference. And the fact that you are now saying that and maybe even give the child opportunities to make a difference is forever going to change their course in history. But you help determine that by the influence you are causing. So even if we don't have free will, the idea that we know and can then understand maybe even what choices we made, even though we didn't have a free will to choose it, to make those choices, will forever change how we actually respond in the situation. Now, we are a creature of habit, and so we may keep on making the same choices over and over again until we do not. But it's still been predetermined. David Hume is another philosopher, and there's a third way. I'm not going to get into this, but he was what we would call a soft determinist, and he ultimately tries to reconcile this idea of free will with determinism. But for the sake of time, I do want to conclude that this topic of illusion of free will is a topic that pops up everywhere. And it's actually popping up a lot right now with the idea of machine learning. In machine learning, or what we actually, and you guys probably most experience with it in regards to insurance, in which we take all the data and we can determine that maybe because you drive a red car, that you are maybe a speeder or prone to speeding, so that we're going to actually charge you more money because you are prone to actually maybe get in an accident. And this is really how insurance industries work. They're ultimately taking data and ultimately trying to interpret that based on what's happening. But really the idea of free will, as Sam Harris concludes this, is that the illusion of free will is an illusion of itself. Because really free will makes no sense objectively or subjectively. I mean, you and I can discuss this constantly, and really, whether we are free or not does not matter. In the end, all we have is the choices we have made, and that's all we're left with. It's only in hindsight that we can say, well, maybe I should have made a different choice. But thinking I made a different choice doesn't change the fact that you made the choice, or other ways. And from a chaplain, this has definitely changed my view on how the women's work there. Because if I adhere to, and I do adhere to hardline determinists, I have to reconcile or just understand that the murderer had no other opportunity. And when I get to learn some of the stories of even the murderers, you find that really they had no other opportunity, no choice at that moment in time. And that begs the question of whether, how, and what we do with criminal justice, which is not something I'm going to be talking about today. But free will really is something we make up in our brains to help us learn from our past. That's all I want to conclude with.